I told you guys I would reach out to Russ about a podcast. Russ Bullock, the CEO of Piranha Games, agreed immediately. He was cool with doing a video or a pre-recorded, and that's what we did. We sat down and we chatted. We chatted about the past, how they got their hands on the license in the first place. We talked about Mechwarrior Online in its early stages, its heyday, and of course now. We talked about its problems that it has right now. We talked about what's potentially coming in 2023 as well. We also talked about Mechwarrior 5, the interaction between Mech 5 development and MWO, the purchase of Piranha Games from EG7 and the sort of overlap there. And candidly, we talked about a multitude of things, and I was actually pleasantly surprised with Russ's just openness. We have a very good understanding of where things are going, and I hope you enjoy this conversation. Quick shout out to my Patreon podcast sponsors, and that is, of course, Chad. Thank you again for the support. McJiggles, thank you. And Downtime, thank you again. And all the other patrons, thank you guys for supporting me over there. Quick shout out to my Twitch subs and my regulars and my Discord subs. Thank you guys for the continued support. I'll have links down below. If you enjoy my content, again, I stream Monday through Friday, 12 to 6 p.m. Eastern over at twitch.tv/NGNGTV. Again, all information will be down in the description. I hope you enjoy this conversation. There's a little bit of news and exclusivity that no one knows about. You guys ready? Here we go. Yeah, thanks for doing this. I mean, obviously, if you're ready to dive in, we can just, go from
there. Sure. Don't know what we're going to talk about. I mean, it sounds like primarily more of a prognostication of the future type of thing. I mean, if it's about specific details on like MWL's current plans, I mean, I could talk a little bit about that, but that's, better for Matt and Darren to talk about. But yeah, let's just go for it and see what we can talk about. Whatever.
I mean, if you don't know, or you just say you just don't know. I mean, that's I always think the best answer. I mean, but last time we talked, obviously we did the last podcast. Darren, you guys just brought him back, and you guys wanted to sort of revive MWO, and they've been full tilt since, him and Matt, and obviously the Cauldron has been also introduced with balancing and helping with that as well. So before we really dive in, things have changed for you, obviously, because PGI was acquired by EG7. How has that been for you? Like, because you used to be like the go-to for everything MWO, and then this happened, and it seems like you sort of took a step back and let other people take the lead on that, or?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's fair, but I don't really think that aspect probably didn't really have anything to do with the EG7 acquisition. I would say I kind of did that step back quite a bit before the EG7 acquisition, probably as MW5 was ramping up towards completion, because Mechwarrior 5, probably even more so than MWO, was something that I took kind of like a personal, what would you call it, sort of a design director type role, when we were developing that game. I mean, just the whole notion of the type of game it was going to be, and the traveling of the star map and the open-ended aspect of it was something that I was pushing from the top, because that was before we got there's a big difference between Piranha now and Piranha then. And again, this really doesn't have anything to do with EG7's acquisition, but we were very producer light back then. People like myself had to step in and do a lot of production type stuff and do it okay, but not to the professional level that it's getting done now. So if we can circle back to that, but like what I mean by that is, just guys like Kerry Whalen, our production manager, and he's got a team now of 2 or 3 producers that work under him. So there's a whole production team that really manages production in a way that is just far better than we did, say, even 5 years ago or less. Let's see, what year is it? 23. So Yeah, it's around 5 years now since we kind of really upped our game in that capacity. So anyhow, so back then I was really, MWO was still going, of course, as it's going today, but it was definitely slowing way down. So Mechwarrior 5 was the big new project for Piranha. I mean, it was in some ways the project that I focus on is always sort of the make or break project for the studio, I guess you could say, because there was definitely a time where Mechwarrior Online was that project. We stepped out of work for hire and we were going for it with Mechwarrior Online, and we needed Mechwarrior Online to work in order for Piranha to work. And then that shifted to Mechwarrior 5, right? Mechwarrior 5 was our big gamble, and so we needed it to get done and ship and hit the market and hopefully sell some copies. So I think I pushed all my attention over to the Mechwarrior 5 side to make sure that got to market. And that included, of course, the deal with Epic. And then, of course, that started to bleed right into the acquisition. Of course, Mechwarrior 5 kind of being a big part of why that, all went down, I think.
Sure. Yeah. So it's funny, like looking back at retrospectively, you said something, I think it was in between now and then, but you said that the Microsoft deal was as far as like going to Xbox was always a part of the plan. Was that you knowing that when you guys started development of Mech 5 that it was going to be going to a console? Did you already know that ahead of time, or was that something that like it just happenstance, like, oh hey, we actually can now do that?
Uh, Interesting thought. I feel like right from the beginning with Mechwarrior 5, we wanted to make sure that we didn't paint ourselves into a corner. So I think with Mechwarrior Online, um, for some various reasons, part of that maybe being CryEngine, um, part of it being just other decisions that were made in development, we really didn't create a game that we could go to console with later. I mean, it's hard to think of all the reasons now over the 10 years, but there's a bunch of reasons that game just really wasn't going to be fit for console. And so that's too bad. And I don't know in hindsight, even if I wish it was, it's the type of game that it is be pretty tough to put on console. I mean, maybe that isn't fair, seeing as how well Mechwarrior 5 controls on a gamepad. That maybe it could have happened, but there's a lot of other reasons besides controls. There's a lot of reasons why Mechwarrior Online just is what it is, and it just couldn't go to console. And so with Mechwarrior 5, we were not developing on console, but we knew we were on Unreal 4, and we knew how well Unreal 4 would go to console. And so we just made sure that we made a lot of decisions early that made sure that we're making the game we wanted to make for PC. Sure, we don't really feel like we were sacrificing anything in that area, but we wanted to make sure that we made the right decisions also that we could go to console. So that just meant that when we were thinking about the front end and thinking about the UI and thinking about the control scheme, it just all had to work for going to console. So we were not developing on Xbox, though. We were actually thinking about outsourcing that work to an external company to do the Xbox port. And boy, it took lots of twists and turns. I had conversations with Microsoft about them potentially funding a Xbox port, and there was another friend of mine who owns a studio that does a lot of ports, and they wanted to do it. And I don't remember when. I'm trying to think here. We essentially had to take on the work ourselves, and I guess it worked out because it, we would have loved to have been more SimShip on that Mechwarrior 5 with the other platforms, but the way it worked out with the Epic Game Store and whatnot, we had this exclusivity period, and so at some point, and again, I'm trying to think of when, if it was maybe like the fall of.
It was the new console, the new Xbox was coming out. I remember it was around that time, so I think you guys were. I want to say you were waiting on the dev kit to that Because you guys were getting those early. I think it was around that time.
Yeah, so we were acquired in, when did COVID stuff happen again?
Right
It would have
before
been like March of 2020.
Yeah. So it was 2009.
Okay.
Yeah,
So it would have been
2019.
around November of 2020 that we were, for all intents and purposes, acquired. It took till February to get the deal closed through approval processes that happened with Canadian government and things like that. But so that fall of 2021, I think, is when we essentially got going in earnest on doing the Xbox port. And so it wasn't until, I don't know, maybe the summer of 2021 where it was really clear that we were going to make. Is that right? 2021? That doesn't sound right.
Let's say it's previous, like the
Yeah,
yeah
it's fall of 2020, maybe.
yeah
Anyhow, it gets a little bit blurry because I think 2020, because it was supposed to be a 12-month exclusive on Epic, which would have taken it until about December of 2020. But because we wanted to sim ship onto Steam and Xbox and everything all at once, it actually ended up being exclusive for more like an extra 5 months or so, because it was May, so it was like 17 months, I guess, total exclusive. So yeah, it must have been like sort of that summer to fall of 2020. We thought, okay, for sure, we're doing an Xbox port. And then it wasn't until, trying to think, I want to say maybe like February or March of the following year, February or March of 2021, where we knew that we were going to make a PlayStation port.
yeah.
So
That was
yeah,
pretty
so
big
the console
news.
stuff came later, and we kind of thought it would come later, just because initially we didn't have the bandwidth internally to be doing all that at once. But we wanted to make sure that when that time came, if it came, that we could do it, and it wouldn't be like, oh, we can't because these decisions we made, previously have blocked us from going to consoles. So we definitely didn't want that to happen.
How hard was it from a developer? You're obviously all PC, right? Mechwarrior Online, CryEngine, old engine. You skip to Unreal 4, the technology that's there. Is it as easy as, like, it's not as easy as buttons, but how was that hard to transition from PC, where you've got a little bit higher requirements, or you have availability, right, and then scalability? Like, how was that for the Xbox? Was that something like that took a new complete skill set, or
No, I mean, Piranha had skilled console experience. It had been a number of years, but we had done some extremely difficult console ports in the past. Like the Duke Nukem Forever console port we took, and kind of a rough alpha version of Duke Nukem Forever, and ported that to PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360. And I can tell you that was tough. We had to basically write the physics renderer or physics engine for the PlayStation, and write the renderer for the PlayStation 3, and then rewrite thousands of Unreal script files into C. So it was a very, very difficult. And those top engineers are still at Piranha, the guys that know how to do that. So I would say it wasn't a difficult port, I don't think. Unreal 4 was there. The biggest challenges for us were control scheme, onto the Xbox controller and PlayStation controller. And I would say memory. RAM was difficult because, the new Xbox Series X and PlayStation 5 is great, but we have to ship on the old versions too, right? So Xbox One, and you can't just do like Xbox One X, whatever. You have to do all of Xbox One. So the original Xbox One has like 4 gigs of RAM, and you can only use about 3.5 of it, or maybe even less than that. And the PlayStation 4 was even worse. PlayStation 4, I think you only had access to a little over 3 gigs of RAM or something like that. So very challenging. So we had the greatest amount of instability on the original PS4. It's all because of RAM. So yeah, I think there was, because I know PC players like to complain about this, and I agree. I'm a PC player at heart. There was a couple smaller probably unnoticed sacrifices that the PC version inherited in the end. I believe I want to say the randomly generated missions. If you go into the mission generator, there was I think there's like small, medium, large map sizes when you choose. Oh, I want to generate a large one. There used to be one called extra large, I think, and it was like 8 by 8 tiles or something like that. It's huge, ridiculous. And in the end, it was like too big anyhow. But I think we had to pull that back and limit the number of tiles that you could maximize out at. And I think the PC version inherited that because it just becomes way too difficult to update your game in the future if you've got different versions everywhere. You want everything to be on the same version. Yeah. So I don't know if I got to your question there, but yeah, it was. The artwork was already there. It's not like the artwork only had to be dumbed down again for memory reasons. Didn't impact the PC though in that regard. So yeah, it's always tough. The hardest part about console porting these days and almost always is the certification process with Sony and Microsoft can be very challenging, and it just.
If someone doesn't know what is that, someone doesn't know the certification process.
Well, everyone's got, so each company calls it something like different TRCs and I forget certification stuff, and so it's everything. It's everything from like when you hit the eject button on the PlayStation, that the game safely saves and follows a particular process, and that your load screens are no longer than X amount of seconds, or every time there's a button selection, it needs to have the appropriate symbols, like the PlayStation symbols or the Xbox symbols. So it's save game states, everything from like if you suspend your Xbox during this and that, it has to handle everything the way that Microsoft and Sony has all their games handle all their things, right? So it's a huge checklist, and that you have to go into, you submit your game for certification, and it can be in there for a week or weeks, and then get failed and say, well, we went to your online portion and your friends list wasn't sorted properly, and then you failed, and so you have to fix that and resubmit. And it takes weeks. So that's the biggest pressure on hitting release dates on consoles, is getting into certification process early. Try to get in there as early as possible if you want to have a backup plan that you can afford to maybe go into cert 2 or even 3 times and get approval so you can still hit your ship date. But if you get bounced out, then you're going to have to go back in and going to miss your ship date. So yeah, console definitely has its challenges. So, and this time we did cross-play and everything. So it definitely felt good to kind of get back on the horse with console work, because we hadn't done it in quite a long time.
So, question: you mentioned Mech 5 going exclusive. Now that you've had time to think about that, I guess I have 2 questions. What did you feel that was necessary for the game from maybe like a time and money standpoint? And do you, like, retroactively, do you think it was the right call being exclusive? Because there were a lot of fans that were upset that it got exclusive for a full year when we were supposed to come to Steam. That's why I just wanted to ask.
Uh-huh. Yeah. All things being equal, I guess if I think I had a developer reach out to me a while ago, year or so ago, and they were like exploring going exclusive with Epic, and that I kind of shared some knowledge that I had on the subject because we had done it and kind of gone through all those things, and basically what I told them was, hey, if you don't need the money, like meaning any money that Epic's going to provide you for going exclusive, then great. Don't go exclusive. Just go simultaneous. For Mechwarrior 5, I don't regret it though, ultimately, because I do think in the end we ended up with a far better product. Not the original I mean, the original release on Epic Game Store. Um, I'm sure Epic wouldn't love to hear me describe it this way, but in some ways, it kind of worked out that it was like our early access time on Epic Game Store, right? Officially, it wasn't early access, of course. It was a full release of the game, and it still was good. I mean, we still had, we still got our share of 80% reviews out the gate. PC Gamer and others gave us, GameSpot 81. So it was still a good game, but definitely rougher. And so to answer your question, in the end, the product that we shipped on Steam, which was simultaneous with Xbox, which had DLC 1. And if you remember, not just DLC 1, but like the amount of content that came in that free update with alongside DLC 1 was massive, right? It changed the game pretty significantly. So Piranha didn't have the funds and the money to keep going. We didn't have the runway to go like another 6 months or another year with Mech 5. It had to come out. And in fact, if you think about it, it's not, I don't think it's any big secret. We got a sizable chunk of money from Epic to go early, to go exclusive on the Epic Game Store. And in fact, this is all a little bit fuzzy for me now, but so December 2019. So even say the middle of summer 2019, we were already feeling pretty pressured, cash wise and whatnot, of like, because we were going to ship. I think if you remember, the original ship date for Mechwarrior 5, I want to say was like September of 2019 when I first announced it. I think we'd announced that we were targeting
back,
September.
Yeah.
And so the only reason we were able to push it back I can tell you the difference in quality for Mechwarrior 5, let's say, if it had shipped in September of 2019 versus when it did ship at the Epic Game Store in December of 2019. It's only 3 months, but that was 3 months we desperately needed. And if we didn't have the Epic Game Store deal, we would have probably been forced to ship it in September. And that would have been unfortunate. So I think the Epic Game Store really helped us a lot in the sense that, one, we were able to afford to work on it for an additional 3 months long. Well, when you think about it, it was maybe like 3, 4, 5 extra months of total development time at full capacity and improving the game. And not only was the game significantly better when it shipped in December than it would have been in September, we had already essentially, taken all the risk off the table and essentially recouped our investment with the exclusivity. So it was a pretty good situation to be in. So it was controversial, as almost all of them were at that time, going on to the Epic Game Store. Now, did it hurt us as far as sales? That I don't think so. I mean, I don't like the fact that people were frustrated. I don't want them to be frustrated. I don't want to do that. Like I said, all things being equal, it just would have been like, I just would have shipped it everywhere that December, like all at once. If we'd had the extra few $1,000,000 sitting around, we just would have. I'm sure that's just what we would have done. Although it would have been very tempting still, because the money was definitely very good, that Epic was offering. But in the end, I think the data's there that people have been waiting 13 years for a single player Mechwarrior game. They bought it. So maybe some of them waited till Steam, maybe a few did, but either way, I was happy to have them wait till Steam too. I truly, it's like, hey, I understand, wait till Steam. That's fine. Go for it. It'll just be better by then too, anyhow. So that's kind of how that went down. I would have, sure, it would have been nice to not have any any controversy. I hate having controversy, and
Sure.
this is one of those situations where you know that it's coming, but you've accepted that you're going to have to accept that controversy because you think ultimately it's not just better for the game, but it's really what the company needs, right? And the
Sure.
company's going to be stable, and it all worked out in the end because we shipped a good game in December, and then by the April of 2021, or
Yep.
yeah, it was even better. We got on Xbox, and then we got to go to Steam, or sorry, PlayStation. So that's how that went down. Hope that answers your question. It's probably stuff you've just heard me say before. I'm not sure if there's anything new there for you, but maybe.
No, I think it's good. I think one thing I was talking about recently on my stream, which was one of the for this conversation, I think it helps people when you shed light that there's more to stake than like as a fan, I could be like, well, Mechwarrior I think needs to have a TV series, and Mechwarrior should have a AAA studio with a $500 million budget. But what I've sort of brought around is like the idea like the market speaks volume, and you run a company that makes Mechwarrior Online and Mech 5, and so like getting the insight of you said something. You said you have people you got to take care of. Piranha comes first, right? You've got, I don't know how many employees you have right now, but back then 60, 70, they've got families, and sometimes I feel like it is lost upon fans of like you may make a decision because you want to make sure they're getting fed, like your company, and it doesn't go under. So like explanations like, well, yes, you said you were going to go on Steam first, but then you had to pull back and go this alternate route because, as you just pointed out, if you didn't do it, you'd have had a subpar product come out, but also you guys needed the funds to be able to pay people, which is how you get the product done. So
Yeah, that's true. There's yeah, I haven't caught a lot of your streams over the years, but I caught one just recently. I think I don't think
LA.
it was the one where I commented. It might have been one previously that I watched a couple. Anyhow, I caught one where there was a lot of conversation going on about this, or like the size of the Mechwarrior market or whatever. Um, yeah, that's. I think there's a reason why Microsoft has been happy to allow Piranha to kind of be the stewards of the Mechwarrior brand of this last decade. And what I mean by that is, if it was something that they felt they could throw a big giant AAA studio at, and they would have a huge, you know, Halo style hit on their hands, I'm sure they would have done that. They would have done that many times over. But it's become very clear to me, and I mean, I can tell you after working with the brand for, I guess it's been like, I don't know, 13 years now or something. It's very niche. There's no doubt about it. So I think it's really important to qualify. So for what I mean by that is, this conversation could evolve. Like, let's say we start to talk about, you know, what would Mechwarrior Online 2 look like or something like that. And I think those are awesome conversations to have. Very exciting. I love talking about stuff like that. I've thought about it dozens of times over the years. But I think before you even have those conversations, you have to establish sort of a baseline of reality of like, what is Mechwarrior? You
Sure.
know,
Yeah.
even with BattleTech, they had pretty reasonable success with their turn-based game, but as we saw, I mean, they're not continuing with. There's not a BattleTech 2, and because it does well, but it doesn't do. It's BattleTech. It's MechWarrior. It's niche, and so I think a lot of times players I've found, and not just players, developers too, like people inside this, myself, constantly, and I have to remind myself over the years, like I might have an idea and go like, well, heck, why don't we do this? Why don't we do that? And then oftentimes it always comes down like, okay, those are great, neat ideas, but we have to keep in mind, the community size and how big it is. So, for example, what I mean by that is, ideally, you'd want to make a design for a Mechwarrior game that maybe meets a lot more modern design standards for like some of these. What are some of the more successful online games out there?
Sure,
You could
if you're
start.
talking like a shooter game, COD, or if you're talking about like I could see maybe like a hero class BattleTech game like Overwatch 2, like a MechWarrior style Overwatch, right, or something like
Apex
that, right?
Legends or
Apex,
something.
yeah, yeah.
So these types of games are built. They have some really really good. They're setting new standards in a lot of ways, for sure. But they're built to exist at scale, like massively at scale, right? Like you have, who knows, maybe tens of thousands of players that truly exist there in a total like free to play capacity. And for Mech Warrior, I often wonder that. Well, I don't wonder. I think I've come to realize that those types of designs just would never work for Piranha, or sorry, work for MechWarrior Online, because MechWarrior has to succeed with its community size, and really what that means is it has to be some type of a design or some type of a game that has like full participation from all of its fans and all of its community, because it essentially needs everybody. It
You're
needs
saying
everybody who loves
spending money.
MechWarrior. Needs everyone that likes MechWarrior and wants to play MechWarrior involved in some way in spending money on the game. And even for MechWarrior Online, we don't really have that anymore. And what I mean by that is, there's just people have spent a lot of money over the
Huh.
years. A lot of guys have spent a lot of money, but it's kind of tapped out. I mean, it's hard to come up with new mechs, right? And really, there's not many new mechs anymore, because lots of reasons, but some of them would just be like, well, hell, we've got
Yeah.
them all in the game.
Yeah.
So stuff like that. So
do you feel like, and to that point though, again on the stream I brought up, you guys sort of not piggyback, but that the free to play game that I think you guys copied most, and I know you're a fan of World of Tanks, as far as like you have 15, you had 12 or 8 starting, but like the model, the monetization model, and I sort of brought this up, is your monetization model being tied into mech packs and sales was very good, and obviously it did very well. It made but as we progress through the years, you start realizing, like, and you get to like now, especially 10 years of a product life, but let alone 5 or 6, when your main monetization gain is from packs, you start to run into some issues like what you were saying. There's only so many, and then then there's the balance issues and all of that. If you were, do you feel like, just one second, apologies.
no problem.
Just opened the door and baby is crying. I'm sure you're so I guess my point being is like that could obviously be a problem. The market has shifted, and I guess before we go any further, I should just ask, are you entertaining the idea of maybe not an MWO2, but another online MechWarrior experience? Is that something you're pursuing, or is that something that's on your mind, or is it one of those things where it's like maybe the license comes into a factor there? What are your thoughts before? Because I feel like some of this could be like, yeah, we could sit here and like talk all about it, but like what is on your mind in that regard?
Well, yeah, it's a good question, and I will answer it. I think what I'll say though is, setting that up is, so there's like we're still developing MechWarrior, MechWarrior content. I'm a little surprised even myself, to be honest. I love working on MechWarrior stuff, but we've gotten a couple of extensions over the years that I didn't necessarily know that we were going to get. Certainly weren't certainties, but we got them, and got one not that long ago, and got permission to go into PlayStation and all these things. So it keeps surprising me, and it kind of goes back to that other point that I think we've got a very good relationship with Microsoft. It's gotten better and better over the years, frankly. I think initially when we got the license kind of in that, that way, everyone knows the story, kind of Harmony Gold, or not Harmony Gold, that's Smith and Tinker, and we got that from Jordan and the whole bit. There's, I don't know, maybe a lot of people listening don't know the story, but ultimately we kind of took over a license that someone else had gotten from Microsoft at first, and then, kind of got a relationship started with Microsoft and started to get our own, direct extensions to the license. So we're still working on Mechwarrior, which has been somewhat surprising to me that we've been able to work on it this long, which is great. And everyone knows we have, of course, DLC 4 coming out for Mechwarrior 5. And there is another Mechwarrior game in development, Piranha. I'll just say that it's not a Mechwarrior 9 2. It's not the successor to Mechwarrior 9. It's not an online PvP online. It's think of it more in line with Mechwarrior 5, but a standalone game. So a standalone product, and so I guess that's an exclusive announcement for you. But that's all I'll say for now. It'll be announced later. Don't know. If I had to guess, it may even be until, who knows, somewhere in 2023. It'll be announced in 2023, maybe even as late as the fall, like September or something. So it'll be a while. You'll have to wait around to see what that is. But more in line with the Mechwarrior 5 type of experience, meaning it'll be a game that comes out onto all the platforms, PC and console, and follows more of a single player co-op type of pathway, kind of building off of that whole technology base, which makes sense. So it's not the next online game. So to answer your question though, would I still like to do? We'll just call it Mechwarrior 9 2 for our conversation.
Sure.
It doesn't mean it's the exact same game. It just has a 2 in front of it or something, or that it's just an Unreal 4 version of Mechwarrior 9. Of course, we don't know. That design could be dramatically different from Mechwarrior Online, but for our sake, we'll call it Mechwarrior 9 2. Am I interested in doing that as well? Yeah, I am. I definitely am, but there's no doubt that is a more challenging project to undertake for various reasons. For one, this other game I already kind of semi-announced. Well, we've got time in our license to ship that. Okay. We've got the license till at least 2025, maybe a little later. Essentially, if our products are still hanging around in the next Xbox ecosystem and on like the Game Pass and stuff like that, then our license can go beyond 2025. But so we have plenty of time to get this other product we're making out, and maybe even some DLC for it. So we'll be working on Mechwarrior for a while yet, in that regard. But of course, a Mechwarrior Online 2, it's going to take more runway than that. That's obviously. I mean, you're not going to make a Mechwarrior Online 2 if your license is maybe over in 2025. I mean, we'd have to know that we have a minimum of 5 years once the game is done. So we'd probably need an extension to 2030. So, but that's not really. I wouldn't consider that a roadblock to this conversation. We've managed to get extensions, and so we could even move forward with the conversation as though, let's assume we can get one. So great, let's say we got one. So put that a problem aside, and then think about it.
So before we
have to deal with you go ahead.
Yeah. So before we go down that road, first off, you just dropped a little bit of an egg there, saying you're basically developing a new single co-op player. It's not online. I'm going to let you know, I had my speculations, and one of the reasons why was in Rise of the Rosselhog, the information, the DLC, there was no new biomes. And that got me thinking either and there's been, obviously with the EG7 reports, it reported you guys were helping with Lord of the Rings Online, and then we heard that sort of Evil v Evil, which was another stuff you guys are helping some of the other sister companies and stuff in EG7. But when the Rise of Rasa Hog sort of, I was like, interesting. So where's their map guys? And then, then I was thinking, you've stated a few things in the past. Darren and Matt have stated a few things, and it just had me thinking. I had my speculation that you guys had enough time frame, so I guess that sort of came to fruition. But I'm not going to press you on that. Obviously, you guys will have your PR, but that's exciting news for everybody out there, and look forward to finding out more about that.
Yeah, it's really cool. I'm glad we're able to do it. It's it definitely will feel like putting more. If it happened to be the last Mechwarrior product we get to develop, then it'll be a nice little bow on things. Because I'm glad that we're able to do this.
So before we go down the path of what MWO2 may look like or could look like, I do have to ask you about the current. And obviously, since we did this podcast last time, Darren came aboard. Him and Matt have been working with the Cauldron. Like I said, the Cauldron's done a great job. And I say this like personally, it's probably the best balance of the game right now as far as action and all that. It's been interesting for sure. One of the things I wanted to ask you was the continued development with MWO. Obviously, you say you have at least 2 years with the IP left, the license, I should say. Matt and Darren have also stated that development can pretty much continue as long as like cash flow is coming in, basically, with MWO. One of the critiques from the fans has been the lack of resources, and Darren and Matt have sort of said that, like, hey, we need engineers, but we're struggling. Can you comment on that? Because I do feel like, again, it goes back to, is there a reason behind them not having, like, maybe not every resource available to them, but is there behind the scenes, like, hey, it's not that easy, or hey, the market is telling us go towards Mech 5 instead of MWO?
Yeah. The thing I want to make really clear here is, because I think sometimes people feel like there's just other higher priorities, like meaning Mechwarrior 5, whatever. So therefore, Mechwarrior 9 isn't really getting any resources where it should be getting resources, but we're not letting it have any because we have higher priorities. Now, that's kind of mostly false. I would say, sure, there are higher priorities, like meaning Mechwarrior 5 and such, but really, Mechwarrior 9 is getting the resources that it justifies. I mean, the truth of the matter is, Mechwarrior 9 now makes in a year what it used to make in probably about 6 to 8 weeks back in the day. So its revenue levels are low. I mean, I would say if Mechwarrior Online was a game that some large company had, it would have been shut down 5 years ago. There's just no ifs, ands, or buts about it. You see online games that are shut down or whatever. So like, it's good that Piranha is running it, because Piranha is a smaller company. I know we're owned by EG7 now, but for all intents and purposes, we're still operating as an independent studio. We're just a part of a group, or a collection, a group. So we're able to get the costs down low enough where it still has customer support staff that are dedicated to it. We still have the web developers and the various people that we've always had, but sometimes we were able to share those costs because we're able to, those same web developers and people can create the Mechwarrior 5 websites and for the DLCs, and so like some of those expenses can go towards Mechwarrior 5. All the burden doesn't fall on Mechwarrior Online, including even some of Matt's time and Darren's time. And a lot of those guys, they're Mechwarrior guys, so they're spending some of their time on Mechwarrior 5, so that helps lower the cost and burden on Mechwarrior Online. But all in all, with Mechwarrior Online, in order for it to stay active and stay live, and for no one to ever show up at me and send me an email and say, hey, I think we should shut down Mechwarrior Online. I need very much for Mechwarrior Online to stay in the black, so to speak, to be profitable. Now, again, the profit is not much. It's again, we used to back in the very day, we probably had some of our biggest months that we used to have back in, like, say 2013, something like that. Some of our very biggest months like around December, we'd probably make as much in that one December as Mechwarrior Online makes now in the entire year.
Sure.
So revenues are low. They're low enough that we have to be really careful. So, like, we the amount of people that are on it, we can justify, and we can justify to anyone, not just to myself and internal accounting and whatnot. But, like, when I talk to new people at EG7, it can be like, yeah, it's a small game, doesn't make a lot of money anymore, but profitable. We're able to keep a 30% margin on the money that is coming in, let's say, and it makes sense. And it makes sense to keep it active, not just for that reason, but because, well, we got Mechwarrior 5 DLC 4 coming. We got another Mechwarrior product coming out. I mean, this is a really important part of just keeping a vital Mechwarrior community, around and nurtured, is to keep Mechwarrior Online running,
Right.
so that people, when they're in between DLC packs or whatever, they can always go back to grinding out Mechwarrior Online. So that's kind of the status of Mechwarrior Online. It's been, so I think this October will be the official 10 years since open beta. Yeah, we hit 10 years since closed beta last October. Yep. So definitely see the 10-year mark. I have there's no end in sight for Mechwarrior Online. Like, there's no end date. I just also want to make that clear. It's not like I'm sitting here saying, hey, man, it doesn't make much money anymore, it could go away any month. I don't think so. I really don't see any reason why it can't go on for at least a couple more years. Hopefully, if it stays, it at least stays at its current level. I think it will. I mean, it's essentially been riding along at this bottom, I guess, so to speak, for years and years now.
Sure.
Probably even 5 years. So it's kind of remarkably consistent now at this level that it's at right now. So we have upped this expenditures on Mechwarrior Online somewhat, in the last couple years, previous to, say, the previous couple years before that.
Yeah. You did have dedicated staff. I mean, obviously, and that's a point. You're I don't know if you know him, but your latest map guy, Kraz, he's actually phenomenal. He's making changes. I think it's been really well received.
That's good.
But obviously, I also know that in the past, I think year, missing a 3D Mark left, Francois, the other map guy, and I think Indy, who's a designer, that was helping. So is that, I guess it's more of just an aside, is that just the nature of the game industry right now, or is that just something, it's CryEngine 3, some people want to work in Unreal 4 or 5, or is that a difficulty as well?
Yeah, I would say that was just kind of a perfect storm there. I mean, on the one hand, I wouldn't necessarily call it the game industry right now, but I would call it, well, that's kind of fair. What I was going to say is the game industry during COVID. I'm not, whether you want to say we're finished with COVID or not, whatever, people get political about that. But, like, I would say from a business perspective, it feels like we're on the other side of that now. Like, things have still changed. Like, we're still a work from home studio, but that's, different stuff we can get into, and the world's changed somewhat. But during those 2 years in particular, let's say of March 2020 to like March 2022 roughly, or something, or early part of this year, middle part, well, last year, I guess. Very, very abnormal turnover rates in the industry. Piranha, who probably had like I don't even know, 2% turnover rate year over year for so long. You know, I don't know how high it got. We probably were experiencing up to maybe 10% in a year, and that was not abnormal in the industry by any stretch. So it did get more like that, and I think the reasons are obvious. And people are working from home, and everyone's hiring, and it's really easy to, you can, get a different job somewhere, wants to pay you more, and all you have to do is wake up the next morning and walk up to your desk, and you're working for that person now and not working for us. So it's so easy. It's not like you have to, oh my God, if I want to change jobs, I have to move cities. I got to move my family. I have to do any of that. So changing jobs is so easy. And so some of those things, Mark was a little bit of a different story. That's more private. It's unfortunate. We miss him greatly. I guess what I meant by personal was just more of a, it didn't really have anything to do with COVID or anything. It was just more of an internal problem. And it's unfortunate we lost Mark. I'd welcome him back tomorrow if he wanted to come back. But nice guy and loved Mechwarrior, which is key. But other than that, we've basically done the replacements we need. It wasn't going to grow extra big, like meaning the new level designer is a replacement for, Francois, the guy we lost. And so the same goes with on the design side, they've replaced that person now as well. So we're really only missing a 3D artist, which we have approved the hire, and I don't know if they've found him yet, but we're definitely bringing on a full-time 3D artist to help out with the content, because Matt and Darren and those guys, we went over the Mechwarrior Online plan like a couple of weeks ago, and I approved the plan, and it definitely included hiring of a 3D artist, and they've got a really good plan. I think they have a dev vlog for Mechwarrior Online planned for this week, by the way. So those kind of nitty bitty details are better to come from Matt and Darren, but there is a dev vlog coming. I would say the support for Mechwarrior Online is definitely, I think, just as strong as it was last year for this year. Like maybe a little more so from a hire perspective. We have hired at least one or two more dedicated staff that used to be sort of sharing resources with Mechwarrior 5 before. So I think 2023, you should consider Mechwarrior Online to have at least slightly more resources available to it than it did in 2022. Okay. But now at least the reasons for the justifications. It's not just because it's an afterthought to us and we don't care about it.
Sure.
Trust me, if I thought, and we kind of did a bit of an experiment in 2022 as well. We thought if we throw more money and more content at Mechwarrior Online, at this point, 9-10 years in, will it respond? Will there be
the Crusader?
Will we see an increase?
Yeah.
So, and I think the bottom line is revenues went up pretty well in 2020, but they did for everybody because of COVID stuff. In 2021, I should say, they were high. Well, high. Whatever.
Higher than where they were.
Highest they'd been maybe in 4 years at that point or something. It's like, oh, okay, let's throw even more at it in 2022. And we actually were down by about 25% in 2022 over 2021, even with the extra stuff and content and mechs and things. So
yes, that was one of the questions.
More of an indication of COVID versus the content thing. So.
Okay, so that was one of my questions, which was, what I'm getting from you is that, is it saying, is the juice worth the squeeze? Like, you as a person would be like, yeah, let's go do it. But you as a businessman is saying like, okay, let's just say I approve a few engineers here or this. The product isn't getting me that investment back. Is that a fair? But you're saying this year you expect a little bit more, which you guys did have engineer resources last year, which, by the way, Solaris was removed, but then we got Event Queue. We had the skill tree revamp, which I love. Both of those. Event Queue is really popular. So, I know higher on the priority list, a lot of people are talking about Matchmaker. and some changes there. But at the end of the day, I feel like that's why, again, I wanted to reach out and have the conversation was, if there was any chance of a second game happening, because like you can keep developing this product until the servers turn off or whatever. But I think a lot of people, myself included, I like online games. I like online play. There's just something you just can't capture in a single player game to an online. And so that's also, again, why, I think the old girl's still got a little bit of life in her. But again, I can understand the business side of it is like, hey, you don't want, if you're in the red, that's obviously I can understand not wanting to invest that.
Yeah, it hasn't really responded super well to extra costs at this point. It seems to be kind of tapped out, but I'm happy with. I do believe that you have to put, it needs investment in it to, because, and I would love it too if people would still stay and play Mechwarrior Online for at least, a couple more years. And I keep saying that it's not like some deadline. I want people to, oh, Russ says it's coming down in 2 years. I didn't say that. It might go on forever. I don't know, but like, I'd love to think that it's got a couple more years left in it. I think kind of going back to the whole, like, Mechwarrior is a niche community. I want to just broaden the subject a little bit more. There's a lot of times over the history of Mechwarrior Online and Mechwarrior 5 that made me realize this, because as you can imagine, we were always thinking of like, well, hey, if we do this, then we're going to be able to find a whole lot of new players, and we're going to be able to grow the game, and we're going to have, we're going to grow Mechwarrior, and we tried a lot of things over the years, of course, whether it was tutorials or onboarding things, or how we advertised, or just there's so many things over the years, but it's like remarkably resilient game, both in the sense of how stable it was with its current player base, but how resistant it was to any type of growth beyond that.
Is there a problem with being a small studio though? I mean, obviously I know you guys don't own the Mechwarrior IP, so you are beholden to getting a license extension, but do you think there's a push, like I use the EVE Online as an example a lot. You have a dedicated company that's dedicated to their niche, and they're quite happy with it. And they're not a AAA, again, they're not a COD. But is that because HBS, Mitch has said a few things of like, they didn't want to be locked into like one, game and sort of design. He said that a few times on Twitter and stuff. And I get that from maybe a creative standpoint, but is that a bad thing? I mean, again, you're looking at it, you're running a business, like, do you see Piranha branching? And you've already said you've got a new Mechwarrior title coming, so obviously you're not branching out immediately. But is it a bad thing to be small and niche when that niche can still pay the bills and put money in? That's not a bad thing, right? I mean. You've sold your.
No.
I mean, your company's bought out by the success of MWO, right? I mean, MWO.
Yeah. MWO was pretty much out of the picture already. Mechwarrior 5. It was the potential around Mechwarrior 5. I think that and whatever 20-year studio. Mechwarrior Online was already down to pretty low numbers. I think everyone kind of it'll fade away, and it just wasn't really part of the conversation, to be honest. Mechwarrior Online, I don't want to discount it though. Like, I mean, it opened a lot of doors for us. The fact that succeeded to the level at least it did, and we have to. I shouldn't downplay it. I mean, for any free to play game to be around for 10 years is really successful. So that success definitely allowed us to, who knows, maybe get extensions to the license. I didn't, Microsoft never said that specifically, but maybe that played a big part in it. And just our ability to, take Mechwarrior 5 to market, I think. So there was a lot of benefits to having Mechwarrior Online. I mean, Yeah, it opened the doors for us to become a self-funded and self-published company for over a decade. We were self-funded, self-published for like 11 years. Um, and to answer your question, no, there's nothing wrong with being small. I just think there's small and then there's too small. So the worry about Mechwarrior is that it's possibly too small. So what I mean by that is, like, I don't know, Eve Online. I don't know a lot. I played Eve for a while. In fact, it's fun. I like the game a lot. My thinking here though is based on their like kind of server population that they show when you log in. It's been ages since I was there, so I'm not sure what it says nowadays. But um, I want to say their concurrent player count. If I remember correctly, they have like this one big server, right? It's like one
Yeah,
big.
it's
Yeah.
gone up in the past few years. I watched a recent video on it.
But
They've
we're
had it.
talking
Yeah,
20, 30,000 concurrent players or something.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
It's yeah,
So those are big numbers. I mean, I know they're not big numbers compared to the Overwatches of the world and stuff like that, but from an MWO perspective, those are huge numbers. Like I would MechWarrior Online at its peak height, and these are numbers that probably people always wondered about. I may have said stuff like this over the years and bits and pieces, but 8,000-9,000 concurrent players. So we're not talking monthly active or anything like that. Monthly active might have peaked at a couple 100,000. But I would say the majority of its heyday, like meaning its first 5 years when it was actually making, I mean, good money from our small company perspective.
sure.
Uh, uh, MAU of maybe 80 to 100,000, and then this is the for most of the time, almost the entire first 5 years or 4 years, let's call it, it averaged probably more like 4 to 5,000 concurrent players, 4 to 5,000 online at any given moment. And hey, that's nothing terrible. I mean, you go to Steam Top 100 now, and you get down to like, or what's that list? That server list is it 100? By the time
Yeah,
you get down to the bottom of that list, you start seeing some 2, 3,000. So 4 or 5,000, you're kind of, you can see where you are on that list. And so it was in that range forever, and it only hit that 8,000 mark basically on the Steam release. We put it on
sure.
Steam, and it was a very up and quick, spike
Big
and
spike,
back
and
down
then
to
yeah,
within a month. I can't remember now. Pretty quickly though, within a couple months, and I was maybe settled back down to 4 to 5,000. So peak time frame around 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 Eastern, or whatever. Pacific people are getting home from work, starting to play. Eastern players are done dinner and they're playing, and we maybe hit. I might be a little bit rusty in memory here. Maybe we hit 5 to 6,000 some on weekends in that
sure.
time frame. 4 to 5,000 generally weekdays, and then your lulls at this lowest time of the night was maybe 2,500 people. So now those numbers are lower than that,
Yeah.
obviously, by a fair bit. I'm a little rusty. I don't even, maybe I shouldn't even say because I might get it wrong, but like probably. Oh yeah, I should look again before I state that, but it's like well under half maybe. I don't know. It's, I mean, so they're still players. It's probably represents the core fan base, and they've stayed. It stayed consistent. I guess what I will say is that its current population numbers seem to be essentially the same population numbers that we've had for probably 4 or 5 years. So
So
it's just kind of hanging out at that bottom.
steady state. So I mean, I want to get back into the MW2 sort of idea,
Mm-hmm.
but uh, why do you like? I think one time me and Darren were talking to you, and you were talking about player, and you're like, "That's the $1 million question. How do you bring people that didn't know about your product into your product?" It's a niche product. It's a niche. Obviously, BattleTech Catalyst Game Lab has been doing well with the Kickstarter, and I think they've been doing well with minis and stuff. It's sort of a resurgence with BattleTech. But from a gameplay, why do you think Mechwarrior Online was so niche? Was it Did you have any thoughts on that? Like, was it, you know, I can tell you, I know from maybe a BattleTech perspective, we hadn't seen anything for 10 years. Maybe they just, hey, I just went my own way and I just didn't see anything, you know, as far as videos or whatever. But like, do you have a theory on that, or is it just, you know, because this sort of ties into a discussion of a future online game, right? Like, which is, what would you do now versus what you did back then?
Yeah. So I'm going to answer that maybe the long way, but that's kind of exactly why I was setting things up earlier in this conversation about, because I know, and again, not just players, even developers like myself too do this a lot. But from the player's perspective, I would have heard this a lot. Like over the last 10 years, what I heard was there was a lot of like, oh well, you know, if PGI would have just done this, that, or the other thing instead of what they did, it would have been huge. Like meaning it would have had a much bigger, you know, player base or following. And some of those examples might be, oh, maybe, you know, you might have heard someone say, you know, a longer form battles, like more like a Living Legends type thing. Or there's lots of ideas that have been thrown out that if Mechwarrior Online was maybe done in that particular fashion or one of these other ways, that would have been a lot bigger. Um, I've come to believe that that's not the case. That, you know, that well, I'll put it to you this way: there's nothing that I've seen yet in all the 10 years of making Mechwarrior Online, and all the 7 or so years we've been doing Mechwarrior 5, and some because we started, believe it or not, January of 2016 on Mechwarrior 5. So even it's been around for like 7 years in some form or another. And you know, talking to Jordan Wiseman and Mitch and everyone during the whole BattleTech development and being, you know, slightly involved with, you know, the artwork over there, and you know, that there's nothing I've seen in all those years working on all those products that says that there's a pathway that Mechwarrior and BattleTech becomes bigger than it is. I'm not saying it doesn't exist. So far, it hasn't been found. And like what I've also kind of found is that definitely the sort of there's a lot of excitement still around Mechwarrior because I think there's a lot of people now that are my age that work at Sony, Microsoft, and PC Gamer, and they're middle-aged men now that grew up with 1995's Mechwarrior, and they know how freaking huge Mechwarrior was back in 1995, and so there's always this perception of like, whoa, it could be huge again, and I believe that many times over the years. Even the latest time was not so long ago. Like when we were going to ship onto Xbox and PlayStation, I thought this is the first time it's been on consoles since, you know, like 1995's those kind of weird MechWarrior 2 versions they put on PlayStation 1 and Saturn and stuff like that. I think that was the last time. And it did fine on Xbox. It did okay. I mean, it did good. You know, like I'm happy enough. But yeah, it was one of those moments, and I probably had about 15 of them over the last 10 years where I thought, oh my God, this is when it's going to blow up. You know, like when we went on to Steam with NWO, or there's been these key moments where I thought, here we're finally going to do the update it needs or whatever it needs for this to just go big. But it never goes big. It just kind of it's great because there's a reason we're still doing DLC 4, and there's a reason we're making this other MechWarrior product, because even though I no longer think that those are going to somehow catch on, I'm going to have a 1,000,000 unit seller or 2,000,000 unit seller or something. It's still remarkably dependable, consistent sales projection. We can probably project our monthly sales projections now on Mechwarrior 5 are remarkably accurate. It's just it kind of does what it does, and it does it consistently month over month. So sales are still really good on Mechwarrior 5. I would say DLC 3 did probably twice as much as we expected it to do. Now these numbers, you know, at internal meetings at Blizzard, they wouldn't even
Sure.
make time to put them on the table. But for us, this is remarkably consistent. It's making money. This is great. It seems definitely meaningful and worthwhile for us to, hey, we've invested in this Mechwarrior 5 technology the last 7 years. It makes sense for us to do DLC 4. It makes sense for us to do this other Mechwarrior game. So that's why we're doing it. So there's still money to be made. I don't want to paint a picture that it's so small it doesn't mean anything to anyone. That's not true, obviously. I mean, I think BattleTech, Hairbane's BattleTech did better than I thought it would do. I did well, I thought. I don't mean that from a quality perspective. I know they had a good game. I just mean I wasn't really sure about a turn-based BattleTech
Yeah, it
game.
did really.
I think it did well.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would say, and I think Mechwarrior 5, all in all, on console and PlayStation and Xbox and stuff, yeah, it's done well. It didn't meet those dreams, right?
If you
And
were
so
okay.
going back to the Mechwarrior Online 2 question, I just think that it would be a mistake to. So here's the crux of it. Let's say you're going to make a Mechwarrior Online 2, and you're going to set out to design that game. Now you could go, hey man, we're going to design it like this and that and the other, like meaning you're taking all your learnings from the big mega, the Fortnites, the Apex Legends, whatever, and you're designing this game because it's going to be huge. You have to hit mass numbers, like you have to have 50,000 concurrent players, or I don't know, it's a huge number in order for that economy to work. Or you design a game based around the community size that essentially Mechwarrior Online was. And I feel like that's the only way that you can realistically go. You have to design it with that community size in mind. It would be detrimental or a mistake to try to just, hey man, this time it's going to be huge, so let's design it like this. Does that make sense?
Are you saying for instance, we'll use the example of those games you mentioned use skins, cosmetic items to make money, and battle pass. Whereas you used mech packs, so individuals spent more money, and used a term last time I think we were talking about, it was like the cost or the per person amount people spend was dramatically higher for MWO than other titles.
Or average revenue per paying user.
So what you're saying is that, yeah, you could try your hand at an updated. It's a big game. It's more of a gamble. What you're saying. It's not the safe. It could work. It could be absolutely amazing. It could take off. But then you're also competing though when you do that against those other titles. Whereas, and I've had this conversation recently, which is you're not in competition with anybody else. I mean, MWO is like there's nothing else. Hawken went the wayside, bad management on their part, and stuff like that. You have no other competition, and then, like I said, staying niche. Do you stay what you are because that's why your fans are still here? And do you, of course, adapt some stuff and change stuff? Of course, like we said, maybe you don't have a marketing model that's based off pack sales, but you still can't do the $5 items per.
So the average revenue per paying user on Mechwarrior Online in its heyday was probably about $90. $90 is super high in the free-to-play industry. Like, I don't know the internal numbers of some of these other big games, like these Fortnites and stuff that have just like, I wouldn't be surprised if it's, I don't know, 10 instead of 90 or something. But of course, they have everyone on the planet playing the game. So
you do have a comparison though, right? Actually, you're in a unique spot because you have MWO and then you have Mech 5. One of the things I've talked to another streamer, Magic Penglove, about, which was we were debating, I guess, like, well, has Mechwarrior 5 been more profitable for PGI than MWO? And is that, because you're going to go where the market shows. Obviously, you developed MWO, you're already in development of Mech 5, but then you continue pouring a lot, resources into Mech 5, DLC 1 through now 4 that's coming out. I lead this around the point of, do you see more of that, the model where you'd go, which is maybe like a old school where like, hey, we have this single player, but then it has an online portion, like a la you have your own servers and you can host, but then that person paid an upfront cost of X versus a free to play. Like, do you feel like that's a little bit more successful based off like Mech 5, like where they have, they're buying a product and not just, oh, I can play for free or spend $5 and that's it?
I'm going to say no to that because, to the first point, has Mechwarrior 5 been more successful? Mech Online's been around for 10 years, but yeah, Mechwarrior 5 is probably close to. Mech Online generated a decent amount of money, but over 10, I would say probably 3/4 of the revenue came in. This is just really rough off the top of my head stuff, but 3/4 of the revenue came in those first 5 years. So, you know, but if you take the whole 10 years, Mechwarrior 5 is probably going to equal, all of Mechwarrior Online's revenue. It'll probably match all of Mechwarrior Online's revenue in the next year. So let's just, roughly speaking. So let's just call them sort of equivalent.
Yep, that's fair.
Lessons. One took less time to get all the revenue, say, than Mechwarrior Online did. But they're both, managing a game for 10 years is a lot of work though too. So
Sure.
it's that way. In that regard, Mechwarrior 5 is a simpler approach to, let's say they are the same amount of revenue, but let's say Mechwarrior 5 in 3 years makes what Mechwarrior Online made 6 years or whatever, like the first 6 years, let's call it. So half the time, and you're managing a community to a degree with Mechwarrior 5 once you've shipped it and you're updating the game and patching it and stuff, but not to the stress levels of
Oh my gosh,
Mechwarrior Online.
I ran into a lovely individual today that so in the conversation of hypothetically.
But I wanted to answer your other question, but I don't really see it being a solution either, where you say, hey man, here's this Mechwarrior 5 like game, which is single player and co-op, but we're going to have PvP in it, and you're going to like log into the server kind of like old school style, like GameSpy or whatever, and just like play PvP matches. And you'd say, well, we got $50 out of that customer because they're playing that. Well, nowadays, you even look at the Call of Duties, even though Call of Duty is a game at scale, like I don't even know, what do they sell, 15 million copies of each game or something, 20 million, I don't even know. And even still, they expect, and they're not just trying to get that 60 US or whatever it is now for a new game out of the customer. I mean, there's up to like 4 battle passes a year now, and map packs. So,
yeah, and the battle royale.
And honestly, I think the hope here is that they're going to get $200 out of all their hardcore players. So, I would say no, that wouldn't be a very good business model. You could do that, but you'd be much better off having,
because everything's live service nowadays. I mean,
yeah. With sure, if you could, oh man, they pump out those games every year or two, whatever it is, and they cost hundreds of millions of dollars to make because they have teams of like 500 people making these games, because they literally put out a game of, say, Mechwarrior 5 size and bigger, plus they practically have an MWO built onto them every damn year they ship these things. So that's crazy. Sure, if you could somehow manage that might be great, but it would probably take a company like Piranha 5 years to make a game like that has a full featured, like kind of like single player aspect, and a full featured like PvP game built onto it. It takes $100 million to make a game like that. So for us, pretty unrealistic. The more realistic approach, and then even if we could achieve that, I think the amount of revenue that we can generate on the PvP side of things with our niche community isn't enough. Like we need something that will have MWO levels of attachment rate on mech packs or whatever you want to call it, skins, whatever things, items for 4, 5, 6 years of really solid sales, and then can run for 10 years like the MWO. Not just like a $50 purchase, and you have everything that that wouldn't work for us. And that's why it goes down to the whole. There was a time, I don't know, 5 years ago or 6 years ago or something, when MWO was maybe 3 or 4 years old, where I was thinking, oh, Mechwarrior Online 2. Of course, naturally thought about all these things. But, of course, it seemed impossible at the time because we had a community that was really invested in Mechwarrior Online, and people that had spent like $1,000 on Mechwarrior Online. And the thought to them of having a Mechwarrior Online 2 come along that, hey, man, you're starting over, was unacceptable. But we could never do like what Overwatch did,
a reskin, basically.
Yeah, well, Overwatch essentially Overwatch essentially became Overwatch 2, right?
Yeah.
And everyone kept. I don't know. I never played Overwatch, but I assume
everybody kept everything
you had. Yeah, and that worked for them. We could never do that for a bunch of reasons. I mean, one, of course, is just technology-wise. Crytek, whatever. We got to start from scratch. We got to the game's got to be completely rebuilt from the ground up using Unreal 5. And it'll probably lean on the technology we built with Mechwarrior 5 to a degree, but probably even going fresher than that, I would expect. Probably would actually have to remodel the mechs and everything, to go to another level. They still hold up nicely in Mech 5, but anyhow, you'd have to start over. And so if you have to start over and release it, it would have to, for all intents and purposes, be a Mechwarrior Online 2. And then, as we described, even if we designed it in some sort of niche mentality, meaning sort of similar to Mechwarrior Online was, where we have a small community that spends quite a bit of money to keep the game viable. Even still, it's probably going to end up being drastically different from Mechwarrior Online, right? So there'd be no sense of compatibility there, where it's like, well, you can have your stuff in Mechwarrior Online 2. Well, that stuff probably doesn't even mean anything in the new game anymore in any way, shape, or form. So it'd be a fresh start. So then I guess that's the first question is are people ready for a fresh start? And even if the answer is yes, would they expect Mechwarrior Online servers to keep running because that's where they have all their stuff? And if they do, which I assume a lot of them would say yes, keep them both running, then that's kind of going to kill us on the new game too, because if we're going to make it work, if we're going to go for it and we're going to make a whole new Mechwarrior Online 2, we need everybody over there. Every last person, in the new game.
So, I mean, that's obviously a tough choice, but I mean, you by the way, are you are you the CEO or president? What is
CEO?
Okay, CEO. Yeah. Okay, I just wanted to, because I swear you were the president of Piranha Games.
Yeah, right? For the longest time, for whatever reason, officially, Piranha Games only had. There wasn't even a CEO, to be honest. It was weird because I think I was the president and Brian was the creative director, and we just left it like that for a decade, even though I essentially was.
Regardless, you're gonna have to make a tough decision because, at the end of the day, something's, especially a product like that, isn't gonna last forever. And if it's dipping into the red, then it's a no-brainer. I mean, it's sort of I look at. This is something I speculated on, but when Solo and Group Q got merged, I've had this conversation, and I said, yes, I understand Paul did testing for 8v8 groups and it was success, but I was like, if you're Russ and you're Paul and you're looking at the projections of numbers of players that at the time, it was going down dramatic, I was like, then that's not going to be a success in a few years. So I mean, the same thing, you're going to hit a critical mass period, and I think you'd be surprised that, at least for me, if you were to say, hey, Phil, we're doing a MW2, it's going to be completely different. The mechs are going to move different. The customization is going to be different. But, hey, MWO is what it is until that goes live. Yeah, I think you'd have some negative people out there, but I don't think you can ever stop that from happening if it's impeding progress. And, like, I mean, this better than anyone. I mean, that's just the reality of like business. Like sometimes you'd have to like, yeah, when that goes live, it goes away. There's games, Hawken, all those games, all the games. I mean, they're gone. You can't even you can't even play them.
Yeah.
You don't have your money there. I mean, it's gone, right? So
Yeah, they all go away eventually, no doubt about it. And that's where the controversy comes with, digital goods and
digital,
digital
yeah.
ownership and all that stuff. It is what it is nowadays. I mean, I have so many movies on like digital platforms and crap, but yeah, this is the conversation. And so in the past, when MechWarrior Online, say, was only like 4 or 5 years old, the answer was kind of obvious at the time, right? At the time, it was like, we can't do it. We can't do MechWarrior Online 2. Like, there's still enough life left in MechWarrior Online, and people have spent too much money. There's just really, we're in this tough spot where we really can't, merge them, or we can't, and we couldn't afford to spend, $20 million making MechWarrior Online 2 and then just saying, hey, you have all your stuff in this game too, because then essentially, let's say MechWarrior Online sales are down to here now. You're at the bottom. Create this brand new game. And unless you're able to give yourself those 4 or 5 years of high revenues to pay back the development of the game, doesn't make any sense. If you just say, here, here's all your stuff, we're going to start out our revenues right down here again, or like maybe it's a little higher because it's a new game, but ultimately, we're saying, we're never going to make those initial profitable years. It's the first 2-3 years in particular is going to be where you're going to pay back the development of the game.
Is this why
And
3 years ago when we did the podcast, you had mentioned obviously MWO, you mentioned stuff, but you mentioned MWO too, and again, shout out to Magic Penglove because he'll remember this. Is he was like, I think more people should have been pressing and saying we want an MWO2, and it's tough because like if you're asking the community, I think you'll have people that are like, oh, you can do both at the same time. But like, is that the reason why? Is because you just felt like that decision would ultimately fracture some of the player base, and like some people would be unhappy and they'd be like, no, sorry, that's not acceptable. I've spent 2-3 grand, And by the way, if you've been playing a game for 10 years, you've probably spent some money. Like that's just like,
I probably put a couple $1,000s into World of Tanks. Yeah, I don't remember specifically about 3 years ago, but absolutely, that was the reasoning in the past. Like whether it was, you know, 5 years ago or 4 years ago or 3 years ago, when this, when we thought about this aspect, it was like sometimes we'd even allow ourselves to go down sort of a design path for a while, like maybe even a month, and like coming up with a design, and then it would always come crashing home. It's like, what are we doing? I mean, this is a fun exercise. I love thinking about it. I'd love to make this, but like, how? Like, how do we make this? Even if we have the money, even if we made it, like, how do we release this? Like, it's just going to be like a huge controversy. Like, believe it or not, even though we've had controversial moments over the last 10 years with MWO's player base at times, or the Mechwarrior community to say, I never went there on purpose. You don't want to go there. Sometimes you end up there, sometimes because you screw up, other times just because it's unavoidable. But when you can see the train coming, sometimes you just get out of the way. And so I think also, we might have pushed our way through those thought processes more if we didn't have other Mechwarrior content to keep us busy. Because I know hardcore, Mechwarrior Online players don't necessarily want to hear this because they would love it if we were more focused on, say, Mechwarrior Online 2 or whatever, PvP online experiences. But from the moment we released, or we announced, rather, Mechwarrior Online, you guys have all heard me say this before, but it stuck with me. We announced Mechwarrior Online around Halloween of like 2011, I think, something like that. And it was huge, super exciting. It was awesome. We did a little like Twitter stupid thing, the puzzle pieces of the Atlas or whatever it was. But it was an exciting time, and we announced it, and everyone was stoked. That's when we launched the Founders Program, which was pretty cool. I mean, essentially, everyone followed us after that, right? I mean,
Sure.
before Star Citizen, there was the 5 million or whatever it was with the Founders Program. But sorry, what was I saying before? It was exciting to announce it. Oh, as soon as we announced it, about half the comments were like, "Cool, but where's Mechwarrior 5?" Right? There was, because people had been waiting a decade or whatever it was since Mechwarrior 4 had released, and they were like excited about an announcement of a new Mechwarrior game, but they were like, "Mechwarrior Online? What? Where's Mechwarrior 5?" So I always felt like there was a huge, and then of course we tried to sort of like briefly kind of move towards PvE and Mechwarrior Online, but quickly realized that the difficulty of development in CryEngine on what we'd already built, from that everything in that whole game was built around client server, like multiplayer thinking. So it just was like, all right, this makes no sense. We can't make PvE in this without being super cost prohibitive. So we at that point we went down the line of making Mechwarrior 5, and so Mechwarrior 5 had its own interesting evolution. Initially, it was going to be like all smaller, like maybe even like a $20 sort of game that just was sort of this mercenary loop, that that core experience, and then it grew and grew and grew and grew and grew to what it is. Kind of sounds similar to BattleTech, to be honest. And I remember the first conversations I had with Jordan about what they were going to make compared to what it ended up as. It's the same thing, because I think we all realized in the course of development, it's like our initial ideas aren't any good because people just expect so much more than that nowadays. Everyone was kind of forced to just keep spending. So what initially we thought, oh, maybe we can do this on our own for $5 million. In the end, you spend $20 million because it's what you have to spend. So just a little side note there, but that's why we made Mechwarrior 5, and it was good. I think we made the right call. I think it's been really good to have Mechwarrior 5, and it's on all the consoles now, the DLC, and then we got more Mechwarrior stuff coming. So that's all great. But if none of that existed, then yeah, maybe we would have been forced to solve the Mechwarrior Online problem sooner, and maybe we would have solved it. Maybe we wouldn't have. Like, maybe we'd still just be right where we are, with Mechwarrior Online as it is. Because certainly there was. I remember it was. I don't remember when. This must have been at least 5 years ago, probably. This notion of like an MWL2 was just sort of floated out there onto the internet, and it was absolutely crucified by the community. Like, it was just like, well,
yeah,
no,
yeah.
no, not enough. Oh, you mean? Well, I'll put a little more flavor into that, because I think people naturally just felt, hey, Piranha will just spend $10 million upgrading it to Unreal 4 or whatever, and it'll just become
sure
Mechwarrior Online 2, or just
like World of Tanks has done, right? But they also bought the game engine company, integrated it internally, and yeah, that's a little bit different. But yeah, that's what they expect.
At one point, even that game, I think, they were making something like $40 or $50 million a month, and then of course that's nothing compared to what Fortnite was making. But yeah, they've done that. They've done a big major graphical overhaul, and a bunch of stuff. Now you have lots of weird game modes that they release. So they do a lot of content in the year. Like they put out, seems like a dozen different special events. They have their own sort of like faction warfare type thing called you've played it before, haven't you? I forget the name of it. Whatever, stuff like that. So anyhow, I'm not sure where that puts us, but Mechwarrior Online 2, at this point, I guess, and I think this is kind of what you're saying, and what I'm saying too is, okay, at this point, Mechwarrior Online's been out for 10 years. Well, at least the public has had access to the game for over 9 now. It'll be 10 this fall, I believe. I think it was fall of 2013 where it was public beta. So it's been out for around 10 years come this fall. If we were to make a Mechwarrior Online 2, it's going to take at least a couple of years, because, can't get away with what we got away with last time. We were one of the early games to come out in this type of game back then. And when we came out and even in open beta, it was pretty rough. Like, I mean, it took Mechwarrior 9 really didn't feel kind of more fully featured, I would suggest, for at least an additional year after that, right? So it's going to take a couple years to make it. So Mechwarrior 9 would be a solid, 11, 12 years old. So I guess what I'm saying is by that point, I feel like people would probably accept the fact that Mechwarrior 9 has had its time and it's over.
Sure.
I mean, some guys wouldn't, but then the question would be like, do you have to keep those Mechwarrior 9 servers running? I mean, I'm not making any calls today, even if this fictional situation, happened to, come to pass. But yeah, it would seem unlikely that you'd want to keep them running, because if you just put all your eggs into this new basket of Mechwarrior 9 2, you desperately need it to succeed. Don't want to fracture in the community of like, we're sticking with Mechwarrior Online.
But you're providing an alternative at that point. Like, that would be the difference. Like, like right now, if nothing was to happen and you continue MWO, like, yeah, obviously you keep the servers as long as it's in the black and, roger that. But, so obviously, none of this is all theoretical, after having this like, is it one thing where the community would have to say or do, or is this more of like what would the fan, to show interest in pursuing this endeavor? Like, what is it, something the fans can do or say? Is it something that like, hey, you're like, hey, we're still beholden to Microsoft? Would it be crazy to reach out to Microsoft ahead of time? Obviously you're developing a new product. I don't think it's crazy for, you said obviously maybe this year or maybe even next year that product will come out. 2 years, that's not a long time, right? As far as like, it's going to go by quick. So I guess what I'm saying is, what would you say to the player base out there? Because I mean, obviously, yeah, it sounds great. I would love, I love Mechwarrior Online, right? I love PvP. Is there anything they can do, or is there anything you could say?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think one comment I'd make before that is maybe just drive this home one more time. I've kind of brought it up a few times, but I think it's really important to just make sure everyone out there like is thinking this way. And that is, as you can imagine, over all the years when we've thought about Mechwarrior Online 2, and Mechwarrior, hit a particular size point, and when I've laid it out pretty bare here today on just how big it got at its biggest, which is still small, but still a success in its own way. But it's still like the population levels that I've mentioned. And so every time we thought about a Mechwarrior Online 2, you can imagine, I mean, our job as developers most of the time is to say, well, okay, how do we make a massive hit, right? Like, how do we make a huge game? And so a lot of times those design sessions will go in places that would make your hardcore Mechwarrior Online fan lose their mind,
Sure.
Right? So, like, for example, Mechwarrior 5, in my opinion, is still super hardcore Mechwarrior experience. I mean, it's a primarily a PC Mechwarrior experience. I think it's probably even more mechy, so to speak, in my opinion, than say Mechwarrior 4 was. I played Mechwarrior 4 extensively. I think Mechwarrior 5 is still a legitimate Mechwarrior experience, but even it's slightly simplified. Well, more than slightly, I guess, when it comes to the Mech Lab, its simplified Mech Lab structure was met with some consternation initially, anyhow, from hardcore Mechwarrior Online fans, like that it wasn't hardcore enough. And that's fine. Mechwarrior Online is, I mean, we've got everything in that Mech Lab. That is the most hardcore, Mech Lab that's ever existed in the history of Mechwarrior, and I don't think it's even close. In Mechwarrior, we just couldn't have that if we thought, hey, because again, I mention these all the times. How do we go big this time? How do we get this thing to blow up? Well, you don't make it like Mechwarrior Online. You don't have it. The barrier to entry there is incredible, right? I mean, when someone sees the Mech Lab and says, "Oh, Ferry Fargus armor and Endo Steel and like double heat sinks," it's like just like breathing to you now, Phil. Like you don't even realize. Like I think you realize.
Yeah.
You probably still don't even realize just how insane that is. Even Mechwarrior 5 would still come across to your average player as like, "Oh, this game is complicated," you know, and it's simplified from Mechwarrior Online. But of course, a lot of people, hey, for example, and I don't want to speak for other people, but like if another company got a hold of the Mechwarrior brand, let's say, and they were going to make a Mechwarrior Online too, I mean, I don't know, like you might end up with something pretty casual, I guess is the way I'd put it. Like, nothing remotely. You might not even think of it very much as Mechwarrior at that point, right? I mean, Mech Assault takes some hits from certain people. I think it's still kind of fun. It's pretty fun. The original original Mech Assault still had a kind of a Mechwarrior IP feel to it. I felt like, but you'd be looking at, a lot of people would think that the design would need to be even more accessible than that, even, right? So that's the fear. I'm not putting that out there and saying that like Piranha would be forced to make a super simple, broad-reaching Mechwarrior game. In fact, I think what my message has been here today is that like over all the years of trying to broaden its reach doesn't necessarily get broadened. I mean, those people that love Mechwarrior, and it's very difficult to create new Mechwarrior fans. I'm sure we've all seen some get created over the last 10 years in the Mechwarrior Online community and stuff, of course, but
Not mass
not
adoption.
at some sort of critical mass type of takeoff event. So I guess what I'm saying is we'd have to. That's still going to come up. That conversation is still going to come up and saying like, well, what is the design of a new Mechwarrior Online, and is there a way to make it more appealing to the masses?
Do you feel like that's more of a designer imagination, right? Because I mean, like I've talked about this in length. I mean, not to get in the weeds, but like Mech 4 versus MWO. MWO reintroduced the critical slot system, whereas Mech 4 had taken that out. They still had a slot system for hardpoints. And so like I've talked about this is like, what is the evolution? Do you simplify it even more? Do you not even have mech customization in the form that, because that's sort of what you were saying is like people want customization. That's what makes Mechwarrior games unique, right? But currently it's very complicated, which it is. I've spoken about this recently. And yet still retain that sort of Mechwarrior feel. And obviously I know there's maybe there will be a lot of suggestions in the comments and forum posts and Reddit and stuff, but like I've talked about this, which is I feel like for the IP to move forward, I guess, which is gaining new eyeballs and new people that are invested, you want to attract those people, but you also don't want to ostracize your old player base, and you have to find that balance. And like obviously Mechwarrior Online, I think leaned into the old school sort of customization. That's I mean, you guys took it to another level.
And keep in mind, though, I guess the other point I'm trying to make is a lot of times our fan base, when I say that, I mean the Mechwarrior fan base, for Mechwarrior Online in particular. A lot of times I'd read the suggestions in the early days, and a lot of the suggestions were like, this game would be huge if only, we talked about that earlier.
Sure.
And a lot of times some of those if onlys were even more hardcore. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like, oh, if you only made it exactly like super, super hardcore. Yeah. And of course I'm thinking like, dude, there's only like you and like 100 of your closest, Mechwarrior community friends that want to play that thing. Like, maybe you and I would like it and those guys would like it, but we wouldn't even be talking about having like a 80 to 100,000 MAU type game that MWO achieved. We'd be talking about like a couple thousand. So, but you also can go too far in broadening it too, potentially, right? The risk is that what you end up with is the new players still don't like it. and all the Mechwarrior players hate it now too.
Yeah.
It's not Mechwarrior anymore to them, so they don't play it either. So it's a flop. So that's kind of what we tried to ride on Mechwarrior 5 in particular. I mean, we didn't go very far, in my opinion. Like, I think personally, don't feel like it's very far from Mechwarrior Online. Sure, the Mech Lab is more simplistic, but it's still a pretty hardcore Mechwarrior experience, which I'm happy about. I like playing it.
Well, it's
But
like the idea of any shooter. Just look at any shooter. You just have a normal character asset that you don't have torso twisting. You can only fire generally one weapon at a time. That's the template for almost every
yeah,
shooter out there.
the biggest games out there, yeah.
Everything from Titanfall, because a lot of people bring up Titanfall, and I can see from the design perspective, and I say this is like people like think outside, is like everything's just a set of rules. Think of every game just a set of rules. So in MWO, the set of rule is, oh, you have crit slots, or oh, you can only fit this weapon in this hard point. Well, just like another Titanfall example, the mech, you can only fire one weapon at a time. I don't think there's anything wrong with that, as long as your core, gameplay loop is based around that. That's why another thing is, throughout the years, people introduced suggestions, and like, it doesn't fit the gameplay loop though, or that's a completely different experience than what this free to play 15-minute rounds are, and so forth and so on. So, would you foresee a futuristic MWO being a free to play title? Is that sort of the
I think the term free to play is antiquated. Live service
live service?
is kind of, because essentially, I think the only difference now between the term free to play and say live service is sometimes there's no difference. And I think at the most, the highest difference level is just that whether or not there's a fee
Sure.
up front, right? So whether it's a Dead by Daylight or something like that, these are for all intents and purposes, completely live service products. They're online, they're live service. You buy the characters, the skins, all the bits and pieces, and everything like that. It's just that they charge you $25 or whatever it is to buy the game. So I think that's certainly on the table. I think for a niche IP like this too, it's it might be, well, I think if we're talking about an online game, like an online experience, like a quote unquote Mechwarrior Online 2, then yes, it would be a fully featured, live service game, which means it has a store and a hard currency and a soft currency, and some of those things just are what they are, and they don't go away.
And that would fit a little bit. I mean, even if you snapped your fingers right now and you made MWO into that, I could see that working, where a new player would have 5 characters they can choose from. They're free, you buy it, but then you'd have to buy, and then you'd have the battle passes and stuff. I could see that as well.
Yeah, we need to get better incorporated for things, the modern things like battle passes and stuff like that. Like we've done our best to sort of simulate some of those things to our event queue and some of the things we have, but we just don't have those code bases that supports those things. So I guess maybe Mechwarrior Online 2 would be, maybe it costs money to buy it. Like, I don't know how much. I won't put a price tag on it. But let's say there is an upfront cost, and then for all intents and purposes, once you've bought it, it's like Mechwarrior Online, meaning it's a full live service game. That might make sense, just because we're the only reason to go pure free to play is if you think you need it to be completely free to reach mass audiences. That worked for Apex Legends, but they charge a full $60 for Overwatch, didn't they, originally, or something, or still do, or charge money? You had to buy Overwatch. I'm positive about that. It was 60 at the beginning. Now maybe it's 20 or 30. I don't know.
Do you picture?
Same with Apex was free, but like Dead by Daylight, all these games you buy up front.
With obviously your experience now in Unreal, Mech 5, you're developing a new Mechwarrior title as well, which again, that's sort of exclusive here, which was really cool. Do you see where if you did an MWO2, you would smash both? I don't mean in the storytelling aspect, but like you have PvE, you mentioned PvE elements, and we talk about other titles where the mechs are still the focus, but do you see it being like where you have creep like tanks and VTOLs and stuff that you could do other type of game modes that you never were able to do in MWO,
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that sounds really exciting. I think you'd want to. It's difficult
Yeah.
because matchmaking, even as we'd have to take fresh looks at balancing as it is, because our balance take for Mechwarrior Online, and we probably can't get into this because we'll go down the weeds so far, but like, the philosophy from the beginning was, okay, we're finally gonna have a Mechwarrior game that isn't just about, everyone rush to the 100-ton mech because we're going to make it so like lights are viable and this and the other. And so I think we've had some degrees of success in doing that, but very challenging. Almost it's impossible in the end, I suppose. And when you got a 20-tonner going up against a whatever, like a Mad Cat or something, it's not going to work out for the. I mean, sure, one of the very best players in the Piranha versus the total absolute scrub noob. Yeah, they're going to get the better of them sometimes. But that's the design challenge there. We'd have to even think about stuff like that. How do we approach that next time? Do we not, try to fight that battle? Like, I'm not sure what that means, but like, lots of we'd have to look at every single aspect. And yeah, it would be cool if there was more full combat arms, but like when it comes to tanks and things, but that would probably make sense in more of a respawn type
Yep.
environment. And I think that would totally be on the table this time as well. I still love playing my World Tanks, which is similar. Like, you just pop your tank and then watch it or leave and go jump in another one. It's a good model that works for a niche community like Mechwarrior. But to your question before, what would it take essentially, or what would what would we need to see from the community? Is that essentially how you put
Yeah, I
that,
mean,
or?
or is there anything the community can say or do? Not necessarily like, oh, just, go buy a mech, nothing like that, but just like a commitment of like, uh, if the community wants that, if they want an MWO2, you know, what's going to make you stick out, go to Microsoft, be like, yeah, or go to the team and say, yeah, we want to do this. Go to, again, I don't know how much EG7, you said you guys are independent. Obviously they bought, like what is the player base? What does the fan base need to, toss your way to like,
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it's really, really fair to ask that question because um, I am the CEO of Piranha, and we are, you know, running independently. So, like for example, DLC 4 or this other MechWarrior game. I mean, we decided to do those things on our own, but there is some oversight. There's, um, there's definitely sort of an approval process on top of myself for say this other MechWarrior game. And then for that, it made sense because again, we already talked about it, but just everything that we built around the MechWarrior 5 pipeline and all the 4 DLCs and that Unreal sort of like pipeline of technology, it makes sense to kind of finish that off. That whole thread of that type of game. Um, for MechWarrior Online, there's no doubt that that would be a more challenging process. Like I couldn't just wake up tomorrow and just like announce to the group, like tell the guys like, oh hey, we're
sure.
starting in on MWL2. It's gonna cost about 20 million in a couple of years. So there's no doubt that the group, would have to collectively have to think like, oh wow, this is a really good opportunity. This is a good investment opportunity for the group. It makes sense for Piranha to make it. Mechwarrior Online made this much money over the last 10 years, and we think we can make that much again and more, and blah blah blah. And it'd have to make sense. So I don't know. It's really kind of hard or impossible for me to come up with something here on the spot. But I would definitely have to. I do feel like I'd have to show some kind of like um, massive expression of interest. But even that's tough because, think about other IPs that the group owns, the EverQuest and things like that, like some really big IPs. And, we know people are interested in those IPs, but the question isn't just like, are people interested? It's like, well, how much are you going to make? In the end, they're a publicly traded company. So it's like, what are the projections
Sure.
on Mechwarrior Online 2? And if the projections for Mechwarrior Online 2 are like, hey, it's the same as Mechwarrior Online 1, well, it's probably not gonna be enough, because there might be other opportunities for Piranha to work on something else within the group that can do better than that. The resources are finite. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm thinking back to the original Mechwarrior Online days, after the announcement, and it definitely was a huge amount of interest. Like it went beyond sort of the Mechwarrior community, right? We kind of like got out there in the news, and I would say even the founders program was, I don't know, it seemed like that was more than just our niche Mechwarrior community to, that got that number up as high as it got. So, but I don't know for sure. I guess if you take the original kind of population count of Mechwarrior Online, and I don't know, that was exciting time. But that was because we had announced, like, we're making it. People were excited. But this is a little different, right? This is what kind of interest is out there. I don't even know, to be honest, Phil. Like, I have no idea. What is the interest in Mechwarrior Online 2 within the community?
If
Is
you're
it?
asking, yeah, I mean,
I'm asking you. Like, I'm not asking you to even answer me right now, but like, the truth of the matter is, I think I'm just realizing this right now, because this whole conversation we're kind of talking, assuming like everyone wants Mechwarrior Online 2, but do they? And how many
valid
people
question.
we already know that the community is smaller than it was, say, 5 years ago.
Sure.
So
Valid question.
half of them, or 3/4 of the people, aren't even thinking about Mechwarrior 9.2,
Well,
because they're not even thinking about Mechwarrior 9.1.
sure. But, like, then I would also say, like, yeah, 5 years ago, but also, just like you said, resources were in Mech 5. And as MWO players, you recognize that, and, people move on. Or just like normal game industry, maybe they run the course and they're waiting for something new. I think you'd be surprised of how many people would, after hearing this conversation, would be supportive of it. I mean, how? I mean, that's the decision you have to make as the CEO, and that's your that's your job, and stuff. But I mean, it's a valid question. I think there's plenty of people, like, we have conversations every single day, and again, I think there's one thing that I think you have and your company has that maybe someone on that, like, if you're a small studio looking at doing a Mechwarrior game, there's hurdles. You've already laid those out: financial, workman, making money off of it, so forth. But the difference is, like, you already have an established game. There's X amount of players that did play your game, and if you there's no guarantee, of course, with anything, but like, if you got that same level of hype and response when you originally did, that at least led you for 5 years to where you made decent money. But one of the other things, the factors right now, is that Mechwarrior fans, including myself, like, I have to separate some of myself from, I'm a streamer, this is my business, YouTube, so forth, to then, as a fan, if you guys go away, like, I don't see anybody else. I mean, that's out there. HBS is gone. Mitch has made it very clear they're done with BattleTech. And so it's just one of those things where I think player base is like, we've been here before. We're in this uneasy, spot as well, where, 10 years of basically no game. So
I do think it is a challenging spot for Mechwarrior too, because it was in, like, essentially like a 10-year hiatus before Piranha picked up the torch and released Mechwarrior Online. And I would say, if Mechwarrior Online or Mechwarrior 5 or HBS's BattleTech reestablished sort of the truly reestablished the glory years of Mechwarrior, like the 1995s of Mechwarrior, like if we hit those kind of levels of success in this latest renaissance this past 10 years, then I would say, yeah, things look good for Mechwarrior. Like, meaning, even if, Piranha moved on completely, like someone's going to pick up that torch and make it because it hit those levels again. But it didn't hit those levels. It made money for people. Like, Paradox made money, I'm sure, off of Battletech, and we've made money off of Mechwarrior Online and Mechwarrior 5, but not the kind of money that wakes up Microsoft in the morning and goes, whoa, why aren't we making our own, Mechwarrior game? Or some other publisher. So I'd agree. Once Piranha's done with it, it's I don't know. I wouldn't say we'd never see another one again, but it's definitely not certain.
Yeah.
It's not certain. I could see that for sure. So, yeah, and I was sitting here thinking to myself, because I'd love to give a strong answer of, like, what would a strong expression of support from the community look like? And I don't really know. Like I thought to myself, like, well, what if people did, like, like a, what do they call that? People get signatures on a
Yeah.
yeah, but then I thought to myself, like, well, how many signatures is enough? Like, is
Because
100,000?
you'd have to put your money where your mouth is. Like, at that point, if you say, I could get X amount of signatures,
yeah,
let's
I don't even know how many signatures would be enough. That's the thing I'm trying to figure out now. It's like, signatures are cheap, meaning people sign stuff, and it, like, even if we got like 100,000 signatures, like, is that a lot? Seems like a lot, but I don't really know what that means. But very hard to know if the interest is there at the same or higher levels as it was originally for Mechwarrior 9, then yeah, we need to discover that. And I think that's the process right now that maybe you can help with. This is like trying to answer that question for real without bias. It's like, is it? Is it as higher as it was before? Or have people got their appetite satisfied with a decade of Mechwarrior 9, and now they have Mechwarrior 5 and stuff. Plus, there's lots of more online games compared to what there was back then, and maybe it's not quite the same appetite that it once was. It was kind of a feverish time then because they hadn't had a Mechwarrior game in 10 years too. So very, very different atmosphere that worked. Yeah, it'd be very. I don't know how you figure out where
you
that
guys
interest is.
You guys have a few more tools too. Obviously, like, you do have Kickstarter. I mean, you did the Founders, which was basically almost like a Kickstarter in a way. Obviously, you have a little bit bigger social media presence as well. You do have the Xbox and PlayStation 3 fan base there that you didn't have before. So you have that cross promotion there. I mean, because I'm assuming just like you've promoted Mech 5 stuff on MWO and vice versa, like your new title, you'll be able to promote that. Oh, what is this? And the next thing you know, so
unfortunately, the whole the whole atmosphere around, like, sort of Kickstarter type things is so different now, right? Like, we were on the bleeding edge of that, so
Star Citizen,
we raised, and the Star Citizen. So now, though, even Hairbrain, when they did the Kickstarter, they did like 2 or 3 of them, right? They did a couple for Shadowrun and then one for Battletech, I think, and they were even starting to get some bad articles about how they were. I remember one article said they're addicted to Kickstarter. But things have changed even more since then. I think the ability now to go out and launch, like, say, a founders program for an MWO2 is questionable, right? I don't really know if that's there. And even if it is there, it's almost certainly not going to generate the revenue that MWO's founders program did. Like, I don't see it doing over 5 million again. So therefore, the assumption might be like, well, interest isn't as high as it was with Mechwarrior 9.
depends, but it could be. I mean, that's the thing, is like, it depends on your guys' design and what you
it could be raising $2 million today in a founders program might be the same as 10 million back then, just because people aren't interested in Kickstarters and I don't want to do it either. Like, I possibly would as a means to an end for proving interest, but I definitely would prefer to avoid anything like that because the headaches that come with that is huge.
Well,
So anyhow, I don't have that answer, but I know you're interested in MW2, and I know I am. That's what I know right now. So, of course, I know there's a there'd be a few hundred people on the forums that would say, yeah, I'm into it, but right now we're lacking information on how interested people are on MW2.
and that's something that the community listening, myself included, on the daily streams, like we talk about. So that's something that maybe it's discussed. Maybe we touch base again after a bit. You do your research, I'll do mine. Maybe see if we, see some crossover there. But I do appreciate the conversation. I know you got to go. We've been going for 2 hours. You've pretty much answered everything. Obviously, I'm probably gonna miss some stuff. We had some. I put out a Reddit and a forum post about the stuff, and I'm not gonna get in the weeds. And I said I wasn't gonna get in the weeds because some of those questions that were posted were for Matt and Darren. And I feel like you said there's a vlog coming out. Obviously, they're gonna have a roadmap for 2023. That's something we can touch base with them. I wanted to ask you about the bigger picture, which you've definitely done and brought, I think, a perspective that, I think just honesty too, where the product is, especially with MWO, and where it potentially could go, but there's uncertainties even there. So just want to say thank you again for your time. I do appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I always want to just be as open as I possibly can. In the past, if I haven't been on a particular subject, it's only because my hands were tied probably on something. I prefer to just lay it out. But I've also gotten more and more, I think, open over the years. I think we were in a different time then, though, because we were really protecting. Mechwarrior Online was, the only thing we had going for a long time, and it was critical to have it succeed. Yeah, it's been an honor working on all this stuff all this time. So a lot of fond memories. I wish one day maybe there could be another MechCon or something. We'll see, but
maybe you do one for the launch of this new title.
Yeah, maybe. We probably have to pull back some. We were pretty extravagant on that. I mean, the MechCons were definitely they were a marketing investment. I mean, they didn't. I mean, the ticket sales and everything probably paid for 20% of what
just getting people
cost.
together, man. It's one of the things that like Darren and me talked about, because it's like just getting a convention where it's like a day or two where people can just fly in. You got a bunch of tables. I mean, just hang out. You don't have to have a world tournament and stuff like that. Just BattleTech doesn't really have a convention, so again, I'll just toss it out there. So you never know. So.
Awesome. Well, thanks, and congratulations on the baby again, and hope everything's going great over there. And we'll talk to you soon.
Sounds good. Thank you again, Russ. And
yeah, thanks, Phil.
We'll do this again. All right. Bye.
Bye.